had a thought I wanted to share today. And it's an interesting thought because I was listening to a guy and he was talking about how that, we need to get involved with ministries, especially in the church, and find your place in the church and get a ministry going, all this kind of stuff. And I was listening and I realized I've heard this most of my life. But now that I've been reading my Bible, I'm going to throw something out that's a little bombastic. Jesus didn't die to become your CEO. He didn't die to become a part of a corporate ideologue where he's sitting at the top and it's all filtered down. Some people have this and that. He died that we might minister. See, a ministry just isn't this kind of org chart, this corporate org chart where certain people are here and you're under a certain person, etc. A ministry is simply what can you find to do on the job site. And it's interesting because men will do that. The irony is that if you put men on a job site and you don't tell them what to do, they'll kind of naturally fall into a hierarchical order. One guy will say, well, anybody here good with hammers? Okay, let's go over here. Anybody good with nails? Let's go over there. Anybody good building trusses? We'll go over there. Anybody good? Can you dig a hole over here because we need to lay, some plumbing or something? Men will fall into hierarchical models. And I think the church is that, with including the women, is you come in, what do you want to do? What can you do? What would you like to do? And basically, what needs does the church have? And of course, it kind of flows almost like a body. But when we build these corporate ideologues and you have to find, their niche and what they want you to do. And I just find it a little tinny, a little, kind of stale. I remember back in the 90s, I worked for a major retailer and we had a great time. But to be fair, in the 90s and before, a lot of the major retailers were either still, the founding person was still alive, or it was the next generation. And so, when I mention people like with stores like Woolworths or Montgomery Ward's or Sears Roebuck or J.C. Penney's or Albertsons or some of these others where they came from people started the stores and they just kind of took off. But they had the feel of the person. And many of them did not mind. I mean, we would go in this retailer that I worked for and have, a kickoff breakfast if we were going to have a great sale coming up. And we'd all eat and talk about it. They didn't mind spending money. You made decent wages and people tend to enjoy. You also worked with a lot of people of different ages. I was always surprised when in corporate America, in retail, I used to work with people of almost every age. Now you're working either with the very young, struggling 20-year-olds or 50 to 70-year-olds who kind of have to stay there because they're trying to get their pension or they're trying to pay their bills. We're missing a lot of people down in the trenches between like 25 and 55. Seems to be a big gap there that wasn't there before. But what happened is that corporations stepped away from their model and became corporate. The first generation died and maybe the sons died, and now it's a bunch of shareholders. Now it's a bunch of people who, they have a more vested interest in the organizational chart than they are about the people skills, about just people caring about people. And I think that's a great danger that the church is falling into, that it's now becoming so corporate, so controlled, that you have to find an exact niche. In fact, in most churches, everything is done for you. We got rid of the choirs. It's just a small little group of people that sing every week. There's no room for you up there. The pastor's going to preach, and he's got 3 or 4 guys under them. There's no room for you there. Sunday schools are usually heavily controlled with certain curriculum that has to be done a certain way. And it's almost like the only thing you can do in a church anymore is give a tithe and find a chair. Ministry used to be a little more hands-on, even giving a cup of water in the Master's name. So I'm saying that in my conclusion here that Jesus said in the book of John, I once called you servants, I now call you friends. Now that's an interesting thing. That why didn't just Jesus stick with servants? I'll tell you guys what to do, and here's the org chart, and Paul, Peter, you're doing this, and John, you're doing that. And Philip, if you want to do this, you've got to be under Matthew because he's better at that than you are. He'll be the leader. Set it up in an org chart. No. He let them go, and they kind of figured it out and ministered with this freewheeling, really sharing the love of Jesus, the true love of Jesus, not this fake, schmaltzy, I just feel warm thoughts for you, this sharing of the gospel, which each one of them took responsibility for. Sometimes we as Christians do not take responsibility for the gospel because we're on the org chart. Let me go find my pastor. Let me go get you a copy of my pastor. Let me find this book from so-and-so and read this book from so-and-so. You need to be able to own it, believer. You need to be able to explain it, believer. We need to own our Bibles, not rent them. So I'm going back to the original premise. Jesus didn't die to be your CEO. He died to be your friend. And I think sometimes we don't sit and just watch a movie with Jesus. We don't sit and just spend time with him. I know there's two types of managers that I've seen. Those that come in, they're kind of a buddy, but you know you've got things that you need to do, but they're being a buddy. You got those that show up and you just jump to it. You know, you'd better get at it because, you know, you're here to work. Jesus didn't die to be your CEO. He died to be your friend. And, you know, that's where we're losing it, I think, is the corporate, the ideologue. One of the reasons why I started doing these scriptures, videos, is so that I might study the scripture for myself, to be a workman that need not be ashamed. I'm not going to borrow what the pastor says or what a half a dozen books says. I'm going to read it for myself, own it for myself. I'd rather be wrong because I honestly studied it out than being wrong because I listened to a third party. So get intimate with your friend and don't just see him as your boss.